Well,
I talked about. I know.
And now, our feature presentation.
He's discovering lots about himself, and he's spending a lot more time in the bathroom.
Todd?
That's Toddzilla.
Toddzilla, bitch.
We have a built-in allergy
You think you're free?
to unpleasant or disturbing information.
Fucker, this is what freedom looks like.
Why do people run from me?
The Toddzilla X-Pod.
Travel stories and the occasional rantings of an evolving cynic who's simply in search of a little human authenticity.
He's not finding much. The Toddzilla X-Pod.
Go Toddzilla. This time on the Toddzilla X-Pod, I get all the way from Winchester, Virginia to Knoxville, Tennessee in 2 rides. 2 very interesting rides. Also some insights into the police and a rare example of me biting my political tongue. Wednesday started out at about 6:30 when I woke up realizing I was lying almost in plain sight in some low weeds on top of a small hill, maybe 20 feet from the exit ramp. Obviously, the spots around the ramps are my favorite because, well, who the hell's just going to happen across you when you're sleeping there? The biggest concern is being seen by the police. But I was actually given the idea by an Oregon State Trooper back in 2008 after I hopped off that freight train in LeGrand. Because I was given the idea by a cop is probably the reason that I've never actually bothered to check the legality of sleeping in these spots. But then again, I'd rather just pretend it's trespassing as a means to make sure that I hide well enough to avoid a potentially infectious interaction with the police state. It's more of a problem in the east than out west for some reason, but after numerous random, technically illegal papers, please ID checks, as well as having to endure the 2-hour, well, you know you had a dirty license plate and that's probable cause, drug search while riding in the veggie bus between Memphis and Nashville, I don't think too highly of the police. Now, perhaps you think getting a certificate from the John Ashcroft School of State Intimidation and Control automatically makes a bully a hero, but to me, that's the height of horseshit. And for a country that preaches about freedom, it sure gets uncomfortable when it sees someone who's actually free. Yes, being seen by the cops was my biggest concern, so I quickly picked up and moved back to the Flying J for some coffee and morning hygiene. I spent Wednesday morning and the early part of the afternoon alternating between the ramp and the Flying J. The heat and the humidity was incredible and even dangerous on the asphalt, so I took pains to stay hydrated as best I could. That morning at the truck stop came one of those moments that makes me wonder about people, including myself this time. I watched a truck driver approach a woman and her 8 to 10-year-old son and tell him to go around the other side of the truck stop where the semis are parked for some free watermelon. About 5 minutes later, I saw the woman nearly shoving her kid down the sidewalk and into the car, telling him in a panicked, almost threatened voice that the reason they couldn't go for the watermelon was, "When a man at a truck stop tells you to go out back for free stuff, you better watch out." Now, it wasn't so much the lesson she was trying to teach. Of course, that seems sensible under the right circumstances. It was the message of fear that she was sending. I mean, she was terrified, and she was literally imposing that fear onto her child. Now, the irony of the week wasn't lost on me. Perhaps I'd done the same exact thing to Henry that she'd just done to the trucker. Although, to be fair, a populated truck stop in the middle of the day and the railroad tracks at midnight are slightly different. Oh, by the way, after a few minutes, I saw several different people putting some watermelons into their cars. Last time I checked, Flying J doesn't sell watermelon. We literally let our fears rot us from the inside out. I returned to the exit for a couple of hours and was getting pretty sunbaked when, in my heat fatigue, I inadvertently thumbed a truck. Now, I usually don't bother with trucks for a few reasons. They know why I'm there in the first place. If they want to stop, they will. Also, they usually can't or won't pick up riders due to their company's policies or insurance liability. Also, the ones that are willing to take riders are leery unless they can chat with you first. I'd get some insight into that later on in the trip, but for today, imagine my surprise when a truck actually stopped and the door swung open. There was no preliminary conversation here. I assumed that if he had stopped at the Flying J, he'd either just woken up or just gassed up, and either way, he was going a ways. And I was absolutely right. Stephen was headed to Atlanta via I-40, he said, and I was welcome to ride as far as I liked. After crisping in the sun all day, I was thrilled. He said he stopped because I had a large backpack and I looked like I was out doing something rather than just hitchhiking. Very astute. However, and I want to be kind here, despite that accurate snap assessment, Stephen was still not the brightest candle on the cake. But he was a good, decent guy and rather interesting. Stephen was 23, he already owned his own truck, was from Lansing, Michigan, and said he was married to a little person, and that his wife had recently had her hips and shoulders replaced. Oh, and by the way, he didn't know how old she was because they don't do birthdays. Yeah, that's right. To his best guess, she was either in her late 30s or early 40s. Now, this is all in the first 5 minutes, and if I've done my job properly, right now you are having the same flood of wildly amusing visuals that I did. Seriously, you can't make this shit up. This is why I travel this way. The people who pick up hitchhikers are interesting.
And vote for Mr. Rhythm, the people's choice.
As I settled further into the passenger seat, we agreed that I was a traveler rather than a hitchhiker. I appreciated that distinction, and I also learned that Stephen loved to chat politics. Oh boy.
Everyone's a friend of his.
It's funny that I won't do this when dealing with the police, but this is one of the few ways that I bite my road tongue in order to further my self-interest. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but normally I'm rather opinionated. Some may claim that I'm an outright bastard when I talk politics. Now, I don't know why. I believe in calm, rational, profanity-free discourse where all voices have free reign. Except, of course, teabaggers, hippies, and particularly former supporters of a certain Alaskan road whore. They can go fuck themselves. Calm, rational, profanity-free. Yes. Anyhow, despite his disjointed teabaggery-influenced nonsense that sounded as though it had come from the love child of Rick Santorum and that crazed tea-wench Michelle Bachmann, I was still content to let Stephen think he was the second coming of Cicero. The ride was more important to me than his political education. The sun had affected me to a greater degree than I'd realized, so unfortunately, my sudden need of a nap interrupted Stephen's manifesto. But come on, who paints a picture like I do, huh? And am I not merciful? I woke up surprisingly refreshed about 40 minutes later and figured out that Stephen had the poorest navigational skills of any trucker I'd ever met. He had no idea how he was getting to Atlanta. He depended on GPS. Are you kidding me? What self-respecting trucker relies on GPS? Stephen, that's who. I had assumed that I was getting as far as Knoxville until he realized he was leaving I-81 well short of Tennessee and heading into North Carolina. He invited me along, but I decided against North Carolina because at some point I had, for whatever reason, quietly targeted I-40 West, and his GPS's route would take me another 150 miles east. Either way, this was a hell of a ride. I mean, Stephen had taken me through most of Virginia, and as we pulled into the truck stop, he even tried to use his CB to recruit another truck to take me further on. One final image for you. Stephen making sweet love to his CB was painful to watch. I hoped it would work, but the more he tried, the worse I felt for him. I mean, he was a good guy and trying like hell to help. But after about 5 minutes of repeated requests, someone screamed, "Beat off, motherfucker," right back at him. That was the end of the Citizens Band misadventure. I wouldn't be getting another truck via Stephen, but that was actually fortuitous. I got some coffee and spotted some cardboard to make a sign that read I-40. While I was drawing it up, Cameron walked over and struck up a conversation with me. He was 25, although he looked all of 17, extremely friendly and very smart, which really stood out after the last few hours, and he obviously had traveled quite a bit. He was in a band, and he and his bandmates were traveling to New Orleans in an oversized BMW van after playing various gigs in places like New York City, Brooklyn, and Portland, Maine. Yes, it was a hippie band. Once assured that I wasn't a nut job, he offered to check with his friends about taking me along. He warned, however, that he was worried about one chick in particular and that it might not work out. And I figured I'd had my allotment of luck for the day anyhow, so I continued working on my I-40 sign while scanning for places to camp if I got stuck. 10 minutes later, Cameron came back smiling, saying that they'd agreed to take me at least as far as Knoxville. That was a couple hours further south, and yes, on I-40. I guess the sign worked. This ride turned out to be a classic just for its collection of people. One of my favorites ever. Just chatting about the places we'd traveled, hitchhiking, and of course, music. The conversation just didn't stop. And in fact, it continued to expand, unforced, the whole way to Knoxville. In fact, we talked so much that I never got some of their names. Cameron, Sam, and Nick were the only ones I got. The other two lost to history. I did get the name of the bands, though. Hooray for the Riff Raff, great name, and the Broken Wing Routine. Coming soon to a venue near you.
Glory be, the funk's on me, Bobble.
Keep that funk alive.
Sorry. On a whim, I decided to text Kirk, my former comic friend who I had gotten reacquainted with just recently on Facebook. Last I knew, Kirk and his wife were visiting her family in Knoxville, but it had been a long time, and I assumed that they'd probably returned home to Los Angeles. But I thought I'd try just in case, and lo and behold, they happened to be back in Tennessee. Sweet.
Have they heard the word of Christ?
We arranged for Kirk to pick me up in Knoxville so we could go grab a beer or 10, and I settled in for the remainder of this fantastic ride. Looking ahead to Knoxville, I figured this would be a quick hour or two. We'd hang out, drink a couple of beers, and I would have to find a place to sleep. 3 days that helped alter not only my traveling, but how I looked at it and presented it? Nope, didn't see that coming.
The Toddzilla X Pod. ToddzillaX.com or on Toddzilla X on Facebook.
It's just a ride, fuckers. Quit taking yourself so seriously.